Here we are. I'm Michael E. Gerber. I'm the wandering Jew, in case you had a question in your mind. And here is Rabbi Levi Cunin, and he's the practicing Jew, in case you had any question about it. We're here to have a conversation every morning at 8 o'clock, Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time, whatever time it is. And you're going to find us on YouTube and on Facebook and whatever other social media decides this is something they wish to do. So I'm going to have difficulty looking at the camera because I constantly find myself looking at myself or at the other person I'm with when I'm doing these things. So I'm going to apologize for that in advance. I want to introduce you to Rabbi Levi Cunin, who is the practicing Jew. And that's obviously something I've had great difficulty with my entire life. Now, I've been here close to 84 years, and I've never been able to become that practicing Jew. But I met Levi, maybe 4.5 years ago. I think it's been that. And we have been in this conversation between us, talking about how it could possibly happen that Michael E. Gerber could become a practicing Jew, just like Levi is. So Levi, what I'd love for you to do is to help our guests discover what it means to be a practicing Jew, and then I'll help them understand what it means to be a wandering Jew, and we'll have completed our mission for today's call. We only have 20 minutes. You've got 10 to share with them what you're going to share, and then I'll take the balance to share what I'm going to share, and then we'll thank everybody for coming to visit us, Baruch Hashem, and we'll be on our way to our next meeting, which, believe it or not, is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So Rabbi Levi Cunin, can you tell us, what does it mean to be you? What does it mean to be a practicing Jew?
Well, first of all, Reb Nochoel, it's really an honor and a great pleasure to be doing this with you. I really cherish our friendship, and I continuously think about all the different coincidences that brought us together, great divine providence at work. So it's really an honor. Also, I'm glad that you introduced me as a practicing Jew, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just practicing. and I'm trying, and we try, but I will do my best, and, any questions that you'll have, I'd be happy to answer to you. So, for you. So, firstly, I think it's important, I've come to realize and to learn over time the importance of putting things in their context. And when we meet each other, when we see each other, too often we see people through our own lens and not taking into account what their context is, what their background is, where they grew up, what their story is. So personally, both of my parents grew up and were raised as observant Jews. And so were their parents. And so is it true for many, 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 many generations in my personal family, where not only were my great-grandparents and great-grandparents observant Jews, which I'll get to explaining later on. Of course, the symbol of that is, completely shutting down for 25 hours from Friday at sundown until Saturday after dark. We're strictly eating only kosher foods, and at times that was very, very difficult. So not only were they observant, but many of those from both of my father's side and my mother's side were actually rabbis, and which is kind of interesting because the environment has changed, obviously, from Europe, and which is where they came from. My mother's parents came from Russia. They fled before or during the war. My mother was born in Austria in an anti-Semitic hospital where no one wanted to help my grandmother with her child who was breech. And miraculously, for a different time, my mother was born and healthy, etc. Her parents and grandparents, her grandfather was a chief rabbi of Moscow. And just putting that in context to where my life starts here in California, which is drastically different, obviously, but just putting in context from where they're coming from. And my father's side, my father was actually my father is, thank God, also God willing, for many years to come. He is a fourth generation American. That's a third generation American is what he likes to call himself. But also his great grandparents, his grandfather was came from Poland, or yes, he came from Poland, but also from Russia. I think that's where they originated from. So the point is that this is a context in which my parents, both of them having being brought up by parents and by families who were fleeing the anti-Semitism and came to America. My father's mother lost all of her siblings in the Holocaust, and but yet when she moved to America, she met my grandfather, who was born in America, and they lived an observant Torah life, which was very, very difficult back then. And now, years later, my father and my mother, both in this story, meet each other in New York, both as followers of the Rebbe, which we'll talk about, but followers of the Rebbe and the Rebbe's calling and the Rebbe's mission to each and every one of us to not only live lives aligned with the spirit and the guidance and the beauty and love of Yiddishkeit, but also to go out and to share it and with others. So my parents in 1965 were sent by the Rebbe to California to begin the Chabad movement work here in California. And Baruch Hashem, I have older brothers and sisters. And by the time I arrived on the scene, there was already a whole household of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, of the Jewish life occurring. And it was within that context that I was brought into this world, which meant that, for us, besides being observant in Judaism, it was also a home where people from all walks of life, observant, not observant, Jews, non-Jews, coming to experience the experience of Judaism in our home. And that was the context in which I was brought up right here in Westwood, California. Interesting, there was only a few families that were like us in the area in Westwood at the time. Us and the Schwartzes, my good buddy, Rabbi Shlomo Schwartzy, Alav Hashalom, who passed away a few years ago. Our families were very interesting because here we were living Torah observant lives. So we couldn't go to McDonald's, we couldn't go to the movies, and we couldn't do all that kind of stuff. Not that we didn't grow up thinking we couldn't. We actually grew up, the way that we were brought up by our parents was, we don't do that. We're on a different trip. We're here to do something different. We're not here to spend our time in the indulgence of the mundane world, but rather to learn and to be inspired. And that was the conversation in which we grew up. Obviously, being a kid here in California, everything around me was so interesting, and I'm a curious person. I always was. And when we were kids, we'd head over to UCLA on the Shabbos after our parents went for a nap, and we'd hang out with the football players when they practiced football there. And so it was a little bit different than it was for my grandparents in Russia. They wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff on Shabbat. But that was it. That was a type of lifestyle that, as a child, that I grew up in. That there were many differences by the lifestyle that we were living in comparison to the neighbors around us, and like the Jewish people that were involved in our lives, most of them were not observing the Torah the way that we were doing it, or they weren't observing the Shabbat the way that we were doing it. But somehow or another, it was always just filled with joy. And there were times also that, the temptation of what would my life be like if I actually was raised in their household. As a child, that was all around me, And it was interesting to grow up as an observant Torah Jew here in California. So being observant obviously comes with it's a lifestyle, a practicing Jew. The lifestyle means that from the time that we're very, very young, from the time that we're little children, my children experience this, we're taught how to wake up in the morning. That we don't just wake up, but how to wake up in the morning. What does that mean? Well, the first thing that we learn as children, the first prayer that we learn as children, for example, is when we wake up in the morning, we put our hands together and we say a short line, Modeh ani lefanecha. I offer my gratitude to you, Melech Chai v'Kayim, living and eternal King, Shehechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla Rabbi emunatecha, that you have restored to me my soul. Great is your faithfulness. Now, as children, we sang it. As children, perhaps, as much as we understood it, what did we understand? But at the same time, that became ingrained in the lifestyle that I live today, where as my mind began to be able to grasp more and more what it is that these practices are and what the meaning of them are, the more they started to internalize in a very, very special way. And they do continuously, especially as I see them in my children. So that's again, growing up as a child that way, I didn't know that we were different. We didn't see ourselves as different. That's kind of the strange thing, because of the Rebbe's putting us in a secular environment. Our friendships with others were deep, even though that we were different, but we didn't see ourselves that way. Part of the tough parts of growing up as a observant, Torah observant, is that there are certain things we could not participate in because of, for example, there's certain, we're not supposed to, we're taught in the Torah that we got to be careful where we put our eyes and what we look at. And there are certain events, they're great events, and for the most part, they're perfect. But then something goes on in the middle of it, and it's not something that we're, that we were supposed to be looking at, so we didn't go to those type of events. Now, that was not always easy. As a kid, I did go to basketball games. I went to the Bruins, and yes, we had to, we were distracted by the person who brought us there. I know this sounds so bizarre, by the way, to most people, and whatever, it could be part of the further conversation, but I'm going to leave it at we had to be distracted. We had to be. We knew we got to look the other way when the cheerleaders were coming out. So
Levi, I'm gonna put a halt to where you are. I want us to remember where you left off, because now we're going to go into the corollary story of what it meant to be a wandering Jew for me. And you'll begin to immediately see the enormous gap between Levi's life and my life. Understanding we were both born as Jews. And that means that Levi's mother and Levi's father are Jews, were Jews. Their mother and father were Jews. Their mother and father were Jews. And it goes back a long, long, long way. In my case, too, my parents were Jews, and I say were because they've both passed. Their parents were Jews, and remarkably, in Russia, their parents were Jews, but I never knew that when I was born as a young Jew in New Jersey in 1936. Now, 1936, you have to remember, 1936 was an absolutely terrible time to be born. In fact, it was preceding the Holocaust that Levi has spoken about, the most profoundly horrific thing that could happen to being a Jew. Understanding that if we go back historically, while the Holocaust was what we speak about, where 6 million plus of our people were murdered, our people have been suffering the very same experience from the very beginning. That means going back thousands of years. Now, I say that to you, understand, as a wandering Jew, I say that to you, which is interesting, that in one respect, Levi didn't say that. He spoke sort of about that, but it affected every single family in Levi's history, in his family's history, and every single one of them maintained their deep, deep devotion to Hashem, to God, to being a Jew, despite all of the horror that was going on around them. So I was born in 1936. And remarkably, though I was born to Jewish parents, I didn't identify with being a Jew because we didn't live like Levi's parents did. We didn't honor Shabbat. We didn't study Torah. We didn't do any of those very Jewish things that Levi was talking about. Albeit, we did go to synagogue when I got older every Friday to honor Shabbat. But we didn't practice Shabbat. We didn't live Shabbat in the way that Levi's family did. So hear me, I was a Jew and I wasn't a Jew. I was a Jew and I wasn't a Jew. And I was, at the age of 13, I was brought into the rabbi's office with other 13-year-olds to study, to prepare for this event called bar mitzvah. Just as the girls on our side would study for bat mitzvah. But understand, I hadn't been living as a Jew before that moment when I began to study for my bar mitzvah. We didn't speak Hebrew, we didn't speak Yiddish, though my grandmother did, who was living with us at the time, but I hadn't any interest in knowing what she was saying. Hear me, I hadn't any interest, and nobody suggested that I should have an interest in where she came from, in the language she was using. She was just grandma. You hear me? Just grandma. A bit strange, a bit foreign, but we loved her all the same. Grandma. I can absolutely promise you That was different in Levi's life. That is different in a practicing Jew's life. And hear me, when Levi spoke about practicing, understand his family has been practicing for generations. Generations. I'm looking at the clock. It's time for us to stop. We're going to do this again tomorrow. We're not going to do it on Shabbat, but we are going to do it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of the coming week. Levi, it's been a delight being with you today. Good morning. Good morning. I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you. What would you like to say to our guests as we pass on?
I just stick with us, stay with us. I have so much great experiences, so many great experiences with Michael or Reb Michael in our conversations, that despite our differences in our backgrounds, there's something really powerful that I look forward to Reb Michael and myself. That's what I call Michael, sharing with you, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of this. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Levi. I'm thrilled to be a part of this with you as well, because in fact, you brought my Yiddishkeit back to me here at this age, going on 84. I love you all, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow morning.